Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Youth Rights Podcast. I am your host, Zane Miller, and today we are going to be talking about racial discrimination in schools and the way that affects young people. We're here with a new NYRA volunteer. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
My name is Faith, and I'm a NYRA volunteer, and I do research and communications, and I write web pages and create design posts, and I'm excited to be on the podcast today.
Yeah, great. Well, it's great to have you here. We're going to be talking about racial discrimination in schools today. So do you want to go ahead and just introduce the topic and just kind of explain what we're going to be talking about today?
So, racial discrimination in schools happens a lot, and I think that it is something that obviously shouldn't be happening in schools, since school is obviously supposed to be a safe haven for a lot of students to learn and not have to be discriminated or treated unfairly compared to other peers just for their race. Racial discrimination can come in many forms, like teachers can give lower prizes to students of color, or they can try to separate students and group them into specific ethnicity groups. And um, racial discrimination doesn't happen with just teachers against students, but it can happen with classmates between classmates. And this can be in the form of like racial slurs and name calling and excluding them from other activities. And a lot of different things can happen within schools with racial discrimination.
Yeah, so what would you feel like is the most prominent form of racial discrimination that usually happens against in schools, usually by teachers or administrators? Like, what do you think is the most prominent example of this that happens?
I can't speak for a lot of every school in the United States, but in my personal experience, something that's been really common is that punishments. So basically, maybe two students may get into an altercation, and this may be about racial, like specifically the topic of racial discrimination. Like one student is calling the other one like a name or racial slur, or that student is just being rude to one student in general, and a student of a specific like ethnicity, they may be the one punished when they are the one that are trying to fight back and defend themselves, but the other one can let go and get free. And this is something that's happened to me and my peers a lot. I remember in school in second grade, I was being called racial slurs by one of my classmates. So I tried defending myself and I said something, I insulted my classmate back. And instead, the other classmate didn't get that much like punishment or consequence for what they did, and instead I had to get my parents called, and I was in a lot of facing a lot of consequences for that, which is completely unfair. And I think that's happens a lot in schools with teachers and things like that, because it's not as outright as a teacher calling a student like a bad racial term, but that is definitely something I see that happens a lot, and my friends have also experienced something like that.
Yeah, of course, and that kind of sounds familiar from a lot of other stories that I've heard, and a lot of that goes back to schools having zero tolerance policies, to where they'll say that regardless of who instigated the situation, anyone that takes place in it gets punished equally. And there's been a lot of situations similar to that where it's like two students get in a fight or something, one student instigates it and the other one's just defending themselves, or two students get in an argument, or one student's getting bullied, and then they kind of step up and defend themselves, but then both students end up getting punished, and then sometimes even, like you mentioned, the victim could get punished even worse. And a lot of that can come back to the schools having zero tolerance policies, to say that, we're just going to punish everybody equally instead of actually looking into the nuance of the situation. And, that can kind of get worse when it gets into these racial discrimination issues. The students, they're trying to just defend themselves. I mean, if you get like called something based on a race, I mean, obviously you're going to say something back. I mean, I feel like that's just kind of natural, like a natural reaction, but for teachers to not really pay attention to that, or sometimes it could empower the teachers to even try to enforce that because they want to like perpetuate the racial discrimination where the teachers themselves could be discriminatory. That can definitely be a big issue. So yeah, I feel like it kind of goes back to the way that schools punish youth, with a lot of the times being overly excessive with it and not entirely taking into consideration the full situation that occurred.
Yeah, I actually thought of like a specific scenario this happened in a popular form of media that is about an Asian Canadian character. There's a movie called Rice Boy Sleeps, and I haven't watched it myself, but I've seen many clips of it. And the main character is an immigrant. He immigrated here with his mother from Korea to Canada, And there's a specific scene in this movie that really gets me because so many people have experienced this. And especially since I'm Korean, I feel the same way as he did. But the main character, which I believe his name was Donghyun, but in the playground, I think that some kids stole his glasses and they were calling him things like rice boy and they were being very racist to him.
Mhm.
So he also started to defend himself. But then in the principal's office, because the mother got called, the principal was saying things like, this is not the other children's fault and we have to punish Tongyeon for doing this, which is a really it's a really realistic portrayal of this happening in schools and a lot of countries where racial discrimination happens a lot, like America and Canada and things like that.
Mhm. And I know you mentioned that you said you've experienced this yourself along with your other friends and everything. Is there any other story that you want to bring up about how this has personally affected you or your friends, or just any amount of like personal experience you've seen with this in school, something like that?
Like, for example, I remember in second grade, my teacher had a specific stool in the back of the classroom that she would send kids to when they were not behaving.
Mhm.
But when I was in this class, I kind of noticed that this this stool in the back of the classroom that kids were being sent to wasn't actually for misbehaving because I noticed that a lot of the other students of color were only sent there. And in second grade, I was one of the quiet students, but I did have my friend, and she was a white student. So one time she was trying to talk to me about something, and it was during the middle of the lesson, and I was trying to keep dismissing her. But my teacher ended up saying that I have to go to the stool. And I was sent there like multiple times, at least a few times a week. And a lot of other students that were like Hispanic or Black or Native American or Asian, we were all sent there for something that we didn't really know how to do about. And during this time when this was happening to me, I didn't realize that this was a form of racism, and I thought this was actually me being like a bad kid, and I wasn't sure how to correct my behavior, and I thought that this was inherently me and that I was not a good kid and not a good student. So this kind of damaged my self-worth in a way with some other factors. But when I think about like where a lot of things happened along the way of growing up with damaged self-worth and things like that, I always think about how I was sitting at that stool, always like um, berating myself and calling myself bad things in my head and not understanding why I can be a better student when in reality it wasn't my fault at all, and it was just the teacher that was implementing this certain thing.
So do you feel like the students who were not racial minorities, the white students, do you feel like they could, do the exact same conduct that anyone else would do, but they would be fine and not be punished, while the students who were minorities ended up being sent to that chair?
I would say, yeah, most of the time. And in this particular classroom, uh, this wasn't the only time something similar like that has happened. I remember one time, that same white friend, she instigated something with another student, and we were both like, I trying to recall, but I'm pretty sure it's that we stole some. I think she stole a certain belonging of him as a joke, and we started running around the classroom. And
Mhm.
I was doing it as well, but I ended up getting yelled at for everything, and that friend went out like just walked out with no punishment whatsoever or anything. But I do remember her standing up for me and saying that she was the one who was also engaging in this behavior, which I was really thankful for. But again, going back to it, I wasn't understanding why I was the one being yelled at, and she was the one who was able to walk free by my teacher.
Yeah, yeah, that's actually a very good example of that, because a lot of the times teachers will just have these biases, and it can, like you said, it can damage the self-worth of young people, because especially if it happens in elementary school when students are very young, because racism is one of those things that it's not intrinsic to a person. I mean, if you're raised without even knowing about racism or something, you're not going to just naturally be racist. It's kind of a thing that is like taught, and like ignorance is like taught to people by generations, and it's kind of brought down like that instead of it being a thing that people naturally have. So a lot of the times, young children are usually pretty race blind. So when a teacher will do something like, oh, they're going to punish specific minorities unfairly, it kind of does lead to these feelings of the student, instead of the student thinking, oh, maybe I'm getting punished unfairly because of my race or something like that. They don't really think about that, especially if they're really young. They're going to more think about it in the way of, I did something wrong, I'm a bad person, I'm a bad student, like I made a mistake or something like that. And especially if their mistake was very minor compared to something else, or if it was really a non-issue and they're getting punished more extensively than they should for it, it can kind of really damage their worth growing up and making it feel like they're a problem, when realistically a lot of the time that what isn't the case.
Yeah, definitely. That is exactly what happened to me because growing up, like, um, I was taught about my race, but in my eyes as a child, it didn't make me any different from other people. I thought that we were all just people with just different facial features. We were from different countries and different places, and I didn't understand why some people would exclude me or discriminate against me just because my race. My parents never taught me about things like that, and they never taught me about racism because um, I don't think that they knew I was going through this in school because I never did tell them or reported to them anything about what was happening to me in school because I didn't know it was racism. I just thought that this was truly me just being a bad student, which kind of really just those constant like experiences happening over and over again and these like feelings that kept piling up just made me feel that way and definitely damaged my sense of self-worth growing up.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of a very important issue, because the fact that a lot of this is perpetuated when the adults in question like kind of perpetuate these stereotypes and perpetuate these biases and this discrimination. And a lot of the times the adults can like empower and kind of try to pass this on to other young people in their families and stuff like that. I mean, I remember seeing this video the other day about this dad like what like taking they were both two, there was like a white dad, and he had like a little daughter, probably like 5 or 6 years old, and they were like riding their bike, and they kept going through they were like riding by people's houses, and when they would see flags that had anything to do with like LGBTQ or like Black Lives Matter or something like that that people had, he'd be like telling the daughter, this very young girl, would be like, oh, these are bad flags, these are bad flags. And like she's like, yeah, the bad flags, the bad flags. And it's like, obviously she's not doing that out of malice and hatred, because she's just a little kid just listening to what her dad's saying. But when parents kind of put these ideas in young people's heads, it can kind of perpetuate this. And then especially when teachers do this in class to students, because if a teacher, the same logic applies in the way that a teacher could treat someone who's a minority like more harshly or be more discriminatory against them, the other students are going to see that from a person of authority, and instead of thinking about it and being like, oh yeah, that's automatically wrong, they're going to usually trust the person of authority. So it's going to kind of perpetuate this to other students to then kind of continue a cycle of discrimination.
Yeah, and the thing you mentioned actually really resonates with my experience because I remember, though this isn't specifically be about racial discrimination, this is definitely, I want to share my own example of something you mentioned.
Hmm.
But um, I was like around 5 years old when I first learned what LGBTQ was because the news was playing. And I'm pretty sure it was about the news broadcasting a protest by Antifa. And I remember they were talking about LGBTQ protest and things like that, other than the Antifa protest. And I asked my dad, um, "What? What is LGBTQ?" And he just said that they're pretty bad people, that I shouldn't talk to them or trust them or things like that. And I grew up thinking that way. And adding on to that, about children just like taking whatever their parents think and applying that in a way of racial discrimination. I'm I know that happened to me when I was in third grade as well in elementary school. In my own Girl Scouts troop, my best friend and I, she was of Hispanic, of Latina, and Asian descent, but me and her were a pair, and we were constantly excluded and left out of the whole entire troop because I don't know the reasons exactly why. Maybe they didn't know how to approach us, or they haven't talked to people who look like us. But that shouldn't even matter anyway, because we are just any other people. They can talk to us whenever they can, and it's not like they need to have a specific way. But I remember we were constantly excluded in activities, in Girl Scout troop activities. The troop leaders would not try to do anything with us, didn't try to learn our names or try to learn what we liked or anything. I just remember sitting on the sidelines with my best friend, and we would do our own activities while the other people were out doing their own thing during every school Girl Scouts troop meeting.
Yeah, yeah, and that's something that happens like a lot. I mean, and it kind of is the job of the people who are like in the position of authority to try to mitigate that and make it to where that's not making to where it's not happen. Like it's their kind of job to include people and to make sure they're not feeling left out and to make sure they're not being treated unfairly by other young people and stuff like that. Because young people kind of need to be taught that everybody's equal. And I mean, I feel like that's a pretty like general message that just people should have is like everybody's equal, judge people by who they are as a person rather than excluding them without even knowing them. And then unfortunately a lot of the times these racial biases can be passed down by adults and with families and everything. But going back to what we were talking about racial discrimination in schools, I feel like a lot of the times like you said, it can be a big problem with uneven punishments and, how people of certain races or certain minorities could be treated more unfairly. And, there was an article I wrote a few weeks ago about a story in this high school in Mississippi where these 7 students, all of them happened to be black, were all strip searched in school over, well, suspected vapes. They said that they were suspecting vapes on them, 7 students, and they were strip searched in school by a school resource officer. According to the parents, even they made to like strip down and made their genitals be showing in the middle of to the school resource officer. And then they didn't find a single vape on any of them. So obviously there was no reason to suspect it. And it kind of feels like the people in authority, either the school resource officer, the teachers, the administrators, were kind of unfairly choosing students, all 7 of them being African American. And it just kind of shows how this uneven punishment is, they're kind of doing this as a way to like enforce control and to just be like, we're going to punish you specifically, even though, from how we saw it, there was nothing, they didn't find anything, there was no reason to do that, and it was completely unjustified. And it can be completely unjustified regardless if they found anything or not, because nobody should ever be searched like that's way too far of searches. Like I don't even think that'd be justified in any extent. But it kind of does really reflect that discrimination aspect of people in minorities, have to face a lot harder challenges from certain schools, certain administrators, stuff like that, because they'll get unfairly picked on and unfairly like kind of grouped into this, you're a bad kid, we're going to treat you like a threat, we're going to treat you like you have contraband, we're going to treat you like this. And when they were completely innocent in the first place.
Yeah, definitely. That type of racial profiling is like extremely harmful, and stereotypes like that like shouldn't be allowed in schools at all. And I don't know like how like teachers are allowed to, or administrators are allowed to be permissive like this.
Yeah, and it kind of does happen a lot. And a lot of times, unfortunately, when the people in positions of authority have those types of biases, a lot of the times, they like to stick with each other and they like to kind of try to cover it up. I mean, there was an instance that I wrote about a while ago as well, where there was a teacher who called a student a racial slur in the middle of class, and one of the students recorded it with their phone and then submitted it as evidence to try to get the teacher fired, try to get consequences for the teacher happening, because obviously that's what should happen to teachers who are going to treat students like that in the middle of class and everything. And then the school responded by getting rid of the teacher, but also suspending the student from school for violating their zero tolerance phone policy. And that kind of shows me that even when a student is using their phone for an objectively good thing of, I'm going to record a teacher's misbehavior and then use it to try to get consequences for this teacher so other students don't have to experience what this teacher was doing, the schools are still going to try to enforce punishment for that. And, to me, it kind of sounds like they're trying to enforce this control of, oh, we're going to make an example out of you. We're going to make this example of, even though you did something that you think is right, you're going to get punished regardless. So other students see that and they're like, oh, maybe, and if they see something similar happening, like maybe a teacher using a racial slur or something similar to that, maybe other students wouldn't take out their phone and wouldn't try to record it. And it kind of feels like they're just trying to take away the ability for students to hold teachers accountable for racial prejudice and other stuff like that. And it really just kind of feels like they're trying to protect teachers being able to have these types of biases, to treat students in this type of way. And, they're trying to prevent, students from holding them accountable.
Yeah, and when a lot of like institutions and schools do that, it makes it really unclear what the school is trying to do because in the example you mentioned, the teacher did end up having consequences, but at the same time, if the teacher was having consequences, then the student also got punished, which means that other students might be scared to follow their example, like you said.
Hmm.
So that makes me wonder, why are schools being on the edge like this? I think that all schools, since it's supposed to be a safe environment for students of any race or ethnicity to learn in.
I mean, I kind of, to me, when I read the fact that they suspended the student, even though they got rid of the teacher, it kind of felt like they did it more of like a publicity thing because as soon as the student has a video of the teacher saying a racial slur, and that gets online, and articles start being written out of teacher at this school uses racial slur against students, and it gets recorded. I mean, obviously, the school's next move is we have to get rid of this teacher, or else that's going to be a lot of bad press, bad publicity, and it's going to make them look bad. So so then when they punish the student, that leads me to believe that they were just trying to cover this up to be like, okay, we're trying to defend. It seems like they were trying to defend the racial prejudice, but they're like, okay, we have to get rid of this person because of publicity, bad press, whatever. But we want to make it to where students are afraid to record, they're afraid to take similar action, so we don't have to do this again. So we can like prevent our teachers from being held accountable. We can prevent our racial discrimination from being held accountable. And it kind of feels like they were enforcing the rules against this student to try to prevent other students from taking action like that. So then they wouldn't have to take the action against any other teacher who acted in a similar way.
Yeah, that actually does make a lot of sense. Like, I know not only schools do this, but a lot of businesses also feel the need to do the like morally right thing, but mainly it's just for publicity because like the same example, maybe it's used in a business. If a higher up is talking to an employee and saying racial discrimination and the employee somehow finds some evidence of that, obviously if that gets out then it's just a bad look. So I totally understand and agree where you're coming from, the fact that it might not even be the school wanting to take action, but it's just the schools like they have an obligation to so they don't get negative publicity.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. And I kind of feel like that also goes into why phone bans themselves in schools are, I would say, fundamentally flawed because they go on the basis of, oh yeah, we're gonna stop students from getting distracted during school, but it ends up having these consequences to where students get punished for recording, students get punished for, things that I would consider to be objectively good things of, recording a teacher using a racial slur or something like that. And it makes it to where it keeps students afraid to hold people accountable. And I feel like, being able to discreetly record something, especially in schools where you're under an institution, you're under teachers, administrators, resource officers who may not always have good intentions at heart and may do wrong conduct. It is very important to have that ability to record that and hold people accountable. So it makes it to where these phone bans in a way threaten student safety because it makes it to where it's a lot more difficult for them to hold people accountable in instances of racial discrimination or any other type of thing. Because if there's racial discrimination going on in the school, the best way that a student can fight it is by exposing it, is by recording it, taking like a video of it, taking pictures of it, secretly recording audio and stuff like that, and then getting that out there. Because the biggest weapon against schools is not one student's voice, it's going to be the voices of a bunch of people. If it goes on social media, it goes viral, it gets submitted to news publications, it gets the attention of multiple parents in the community who demand accountability. I mean, that's going to be the way to actually get change done. And being able to record is very important to being able to be heard and everything, especially because a lot of times young people aren't taken seriously, especially when it comes to the word of a young person against the word of a person in authority.
Yeah, definitely. And my a lot of big concern of mine is when in elementary school when a lot of racial discrimination happens, when kids are just learning from their parents and taking what their parents think as their own opinions and things like that. A lot of these youth, they can't record, and because they don't have phones and they don't have the capacity or abilities to like actually take out a phone or sometimes maybe even recognize that they are being racially discriminated. So definitely being able to recognize that and reporting it to a parent is definitely a skill or a thing that a lot of youth, children that are a specific minority really need. And I remember during the COVID-19 pandemic, this was the year that a lot of kids were allowed to go back to school, but we still needed a lot of face masks. And again, this was also a very big time of a lot of Asian hate. So, and the racial discrimination for me was that I was a bus patrol, and I know that this might not be in a lot of different counties or states across the country, but basically, what a bus patrol is that there are fifth graders or sixth graders who look after like younger children to make sure they cross the road safely or get to their bus stop safely. And I was in sixth grade during this when this happened. So when I was a patrol, I remember that there was this person and she would constantly like pull her mask up and say, "Oh, it's the patrol virus," and like this Asian girl is a patrol patrol virus, things like that. And I was old enough to understand this is a form of racial discrimination. So taking that, I told my dad that, and obviously he was furious. So my dad was able to write to the principal about this, and a lot of accountability and consequences were shown to the student who was saying these things to me. So, like you said, a lot of youth aren't taken seriously, but when parents and like people of like authority, like adults, step in, that's when schools can try to take a lot of action.
Yeah, and the sad part about it is, we kind of needs to be that further action by adults and by other people of authority. And it kind of reflects the way that when youth aren't taken seriously, and it kind of just reflects how like a lot of young people aren't listened to all the time. I mean, like a lot of the times if you go to a teacher with like concern with another student or something like that, they're not going to take it super seriously because there's not really a threat of repercussions to them. But if a parent comes in and they start making a fuss about it, they're going to be listened to a lot more. It's especially a big deal in racial discrimination instances because a lot of the times like you said, there's kind of a shame element to it. I mean, how you said it affected your self-worth and your self-confidence and everything. So I mean, a lot of like, I know you went to your parent about it, but there's a lot of students who may not want to do that. They may not want to go to their parents and be like, yeah, no, I'm being treated unfairly by a teacher, I'm being treated unfairly by other students, and there's definitely a racial element to that. Because there's shame in it. They feel like they don't want to just like put that out there, and they feel like they kind of internalize it a lot of the times. So it makes it really hard to actually get good accountability done with this, and especially a lot of times that if teachers are the ones who are responsible for it, because if a student doesn't want to go to their parents about it, they can't go to a teacher about it either if the teacher is the one who's actually perpetuating the racial discrimination issue as well. So, it kind of creates this feedback loop where the student kind of feels stuck and they feel like it's their fault and they take responsibility for it and they internalize a lot of discrimination, and it, can kind of have a very negative effect on them growing up.
Yeah, I also want to add on to that by saying I think that in um, when in older kids, like especially middle school or like my age when I was in sixth grade, snitching to like to your parents or a teacher about this type of behavior is very discouraged, and it can make you seem like a bad person for getting the other person in trouble. And yes, they're called snitches. So I think that's a reason why a lot of students may not want to come out with their problems as well on top of that.
Yeah, and that's it kind of reflects the other issues that we're talking about as well, because if a student, there's definitely a negative connotation with snitching and stuff like that. But also there's not really an alternative because the other things we've talked about, I mean, when it's really frowned upon in the system, like the school system, for students to like try to resolve issues between themselves, because a lot of the times if there's like a racial discrimination issue, it's not going to be one of those issues that it's like you talk it out calmly and then everybody is like sunshine and rainbows at the end. If someone's being racially discriminative to another person, it's obviously if the other person sticks up for themselves against the student, it's obviously going to get really heated. It could become a big argument. Maybe even a physical fight could erupt. And then, like we said about with the zero tolerance policies, it could everyone could get punished equally. Or if the teachers, the ones being in authority, are the ones perpetuating the discrimination, they could actually end up punishing the victim or punishing the person who is experiencing the discrimination a lot more heavily than the person who is actually perpetrating the discrimination. So, like we said, there's that snitching element of, oh, if you're a student, you kind of feel wrong to maybe go to a teacher about it, or there's a shame element, so you don't want to go to your parents about it. You feel like that could perpetuate the mistreatment that you're facing from other people. But at the same time, if you try to resolve it between you and the other person and it gets heated, you may also be facing punishment at the hands of the authority if, they're also going to perpetuate that discrimination. So it does kind of further that element of feeling like, nobody's on your side. You're kind of stuck in an unfortunate situation. And a lot of the times, people who are more shy or who are more like laid back, they're just going to sit there and take it. And, they're going to sit there and deal with what's happening instead of actually trying to take action and fix the situation.
Yeah, and what you said about students may try to like when they try to resolve something together, that brings me back to a story that my father would tell me about a lot. My father immigrated to the United States when in 1976, I think, when he was 11 years old.
Hmm.
And obviously, in the 1970s, America was not the most welcoming places to Asian immigrants and just immigrants in general, like any minority.
Hmm.
And my father would constantly be called racial slurs in schools. He would take it upon himself and also get into fights a lot, very, very graphic physical fights.
Hmm.
And it definitely is not his fault for reacting that way. And that I feel that like it was so wrong for students to be picking on him just for his race like that. But when that happened, like this still happens in school system today. He was punished miserably for this. And if I recall correctly, my grandmother, his mother, would be called into the principal's office, and she would have to practically beg for forgiveness for her son's actions when it should be about the when it should be more about what the people that were calling him racial slurs, they should be the ones that have to get consequences for their actions, which is so unfair. But then this also makes me think about that. I think that times still have changed a lot because even if my my grandmother was the one that was bringing it, that's still a parent, but still things did not clear up for my father. And but now, as you can see with the situation between me and my own father trying to bring it in, I think that parents now are being taken a lot more seriously these days than they were before, which is definitely a thing that I see in schools that I definitely think is a sign of improvement about this type of situation, but still nonetheless that the way people are being treated and racially discriminated in school is still very bad.
And yeah, and that's why it's especially important for the people in authority to take this seriously. And that's then why it's especially troubling when the people in authority, like the teachers and the administrators and stuff, are people who perpetuate the discrimination because it allows people who, the students who do it to get away with it. And it allows, the victims to just continuously be trapped in the situation where they don't feel like they can go to teachers and they feel like if they handle it with students, they can get punished themselves. It all kind of stems back to, if we're trusting schools to handle these situations, we need to make sure that the people who are in these positions of authority are not discriminatory, are not biased in these certain ways, and are actually looking at the nuance of every single situation to see who's in the wrong, who's initiating the problem, and how we're going to like proportion punishments to the people who actually deserve it rather than just dishing out stuff on a uniform one size fits all basis instead of actually looking at the individual situation.
Yeah, so definitely does go back to the zero tolerance policy. Like, really, teachers need to actually assess like the situation that's happening here to give like the suitable consequence.
Yeah, for sure. So in your experience or any research that you've done, is there any other like big ways that you've seen racial discrimination happen in schools? Like I know you've talked about like unfair punishment and stuff like that, but is there any like other major ways that you've seen schools or people in positions of authority exercise this racial discrimination over young people?
I think other ways is that in the specific classrooms themselves, a lot of teachers can have like what they do specifically, not as just a school in general, if that makes sense. Because teachers are their own person. Their
Mhm.
classroom is their own space. So I guess teachers, they could do racial discrimination in specific ways. And this kind of brings me back to like about, students may be receiving like unfair prizes for their compared to other students. Because I remember like one time in school, like my teacher was giving out Kit Kats, but they would give out like the full size candy to the white students, but they would make like the students of color split the Kit Kat so they could get only half of them. So that, even though like it's not like as serious as it is to like the other things about like unfair punishment and like, actual institution corruption, I think that small things like that in classrooms can definitely like do something to alter a child's like sense of like what's really right and what's really wrong. Why am I be treating this way and I don't understand.
So they literally just gave like full Kit Kats to white students and then half Kit Kats to minorities. Like all it
Yes.
was, so it's like everybody's in a line, they're handing out Kit Kats and like, oh, you're a white student, they gave them a full Kit Kat. They literally did that and they got away with it?
Yeah, I don't recall correct. I don't recall like exactly, but I just know it was a reward for like a worksheet or something.
Mm-hmm.
Like the teacher was like, "Oh, okay." She gave this whole candy bar. They weren't in a line. It's like, "Okay, here, you can have this for your reward." But then
Mm-hmm.
when I came up, she split the Kit Kat and she was like, "Okay, this is for you and this is for the other student for you to share."
Wow. See, yeah, that's kind of that makes a bit more sense that she's doing it in more of like a subtle way instead of doing it that straight up that I was originally thinking. Yeah, because teachers can get away with stuff like that in doing stuff in like subtle ways that like some students may not even pick up on. Like they may pick up on, oh, it's kind of unfair that this guy got a Kit Kat and I got like half a Kit Kat. But then when you actually look back and you think on it, it's like, oh, the white students were getting the full Kit Kats and the other students were getting half the Kit Kats and stuff. And it's like, a lot of the times if you bring stuff up like that to like a school administrator or something and be like, oh, the teachers giving out Kit Kats unfairly, they're gonna like not take you seriously. They're gonna like seriously, like non-issue, by the way. But if it's done in a way that's based on racial discrimination, it's showing like an internal bias that a teacher's having. So if a teacher has an internal bias in how they're going to give rewards to students, it also means they have an internal bias to racially in any aspect, because if they have this racial discrimination in their head, that could be used in any way. I mean, it could be used in like giving out different rewards and stuff, but it could also be used in how you're going to grade, how you're going to punish, how you're going to handle situations, stuff like that. So even teachers doing subtle stuff like that is still indicative of an internalized racial bias that, first of all, students shouldn't have to take the brunt of, and second of all, is showing the way that if a teacher acts like that with these things, they're going to continue to act like that with increasingly bigger things because they know they can get away with the small things.
Oh, yeah, and about subtlety, I genuinely remember that our teacher would like when we had group projects, our teacher would pair like students of a certain minority with each other, but then the white students would get paired together. And I actually have a picture of everybody with their projects. You can see the Asians are paired with the Asians, or Black people are paired with the Black people. But like Latin Americans are paired with Latin Americans, but the white people are paired with the white people, and
Mm-hmm.
that is really bad. That is a very like clear example of just actual like, even though it's in a single classroom itself and not the entire school is doing it, that's just like, that also can like make a student, like a child, think like, why is the system like this? Like, why can't I be friends with with the white
Mm-hmm.
person? And I um also remember that when I was that our teacher would try to make it seem like it's randomized, right? Names are in a hat. You pick out a name. This is your partner.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, she would rearrange the partners. Like actually, like I got paired up with this white person. Then she pulled me out of the group randomly and said, "You're gonna work with this boy." And I remembered
Wow.
that he was a Latin American boy, and we had to do
Mm-hmm.
the project together. And that happens a lot of times with other kids in that class.
That's interesting. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, yeah, that's such a weird thing to do. And also it's like it's kind of like trying to internalize racial barriers within children. Like because like I said, a lot of the times, unless a young person has been had these ideas forced down their throat by parents or the people of authority, they're kind of going to be going into school and stuff with, especially in a diverse community, being inherently race blind unless they've been forced into not being race blind by other people. So they're not going to think about it about like, oh yeah, I can't work with this person of another race because I'm this race. Like kids aren't thinking about that most of the time. That's not a thing that like normal people think about. So for teachers to try to artificially throw up these barriers of, oh yeah, let's have the black students work with the black students, the Asian students work with the Asian students, the white ones can work with the white ones, that it kind of reinforces these racial barriers within students, and can kind of lead up to this internalization. So if you're always working with students of your own race, you're then always going to associate with people of your own race because you're like, oh yeah, this is normal, this is what's been given to me, this is what's been like enforced upon me by people in authority, so you don't see anything wrong with it, and you're like, oh yeah, I should only be with people of this race instead of being with a diverse thing. And it's kind of a very, very subtle way of perpetuating the racial issues and like racial barriers, I guess, that exist in our society.
Yeah, and definitely like pairing it up with races was also what I did see in schools, and I know a lot of other schools that may happen. But also, again, I want to say that it wasn't just like the same race with the same race. It was
Mm-hmm.
basically just minority with minority too,
Mm-hmm.
and that's just like that just makes me wonder like what is that an indication of? Because why would the teacher feel the need to even do that? But it would
Mm-hmm.
happen in every single project, so it wasn't a coincidence. But then I'm still wondering, like, it is racism, but why would a teacher be even doing this to instill this type of mindset in these children?
Yeah, I mean, you never really know. I mean, the first thought that comes to my head, I mean, especially if the teacher's been racially discriminatory in other ways, it's probably a stereotype thing. That's my first thought. To be like, because it's usually a stereotype around certain minorities that, like, oh, they may not be as smart as white people or stuff like that. So the teacher may have the idea of, oh, we can't drag down my precious white students by pairing them up with a minority or just something weird like that. I don't know. That's my
Oh,
first thought, but
honestly.
especially if the teacher's racially discriminatory in other ways. But there could be any way, there could be any reason to do it, but regardless of why they're doing it, it's still wrong to throw up racial barriers in young people, especially very young children, elementary school and stuff like that. Like, no reason to do that. You should inherently be teaching kids to be race blind. That's always been my idea about it, is like you should look at someone, and race should be the last thing that should come to your mind. Like, they should like look at you and be like, oh yeah, just like think about you as a person, like who you are as an individual, rather than, oh yeah, that's an Asian person, that's a white person, stuff like that. And that's kind of, teachers need to lead by example with that. They need to not have try to group people up, because if you group people up, you call attention to different types of races, different types of groups, and you're kind of grouping minorities in one category and then white people in another category, and it's calling attention to these barriers and making kids think about it when they just kind of need to have that idea that there's no reason to have these barriers. These barriers are artificial, invented by humans, when there's realistically no reason for them to exist. It's just perpetuating this barbaric racial type of like hierarchy that existed in the olden days, and there's still a lot of people trying to enforce this in the minds of young people when absolutely no reason to do that.
Yeah, and like I said, like brought up earlier in the conversation, no kid is inherently racist. It's just
Mm-hmm.
that even though they may have these certain thoughts, that's because like us an older person like a parent or a teacher instilled these things into into that child's head. But children who haven't been taught that way, they are going to play with anyone regardless of race. Like that's their
Mm-hmm.
friend. So why? And there should be no problem with that at all. Like every child, we're all the same. We all bleed red. So why are these teachers specifically trying to like force these racial boundaries up?
Mm-hmm. And yeah, it is just like a big perpetuation thing. And something that I thought about, and this is kind of a huge thing, is there was this video I saw like a few weeks ago, and it was of this, I think it was like a Bible camp for like young kids and their parents and everything. And it was like in a very like south, deep south, like country in America. It was like, I think mostly white, like Christian. And they were putting on this like play or like this performance of like soldiers going up and like fake killing immigrants and being like, oh yeah, here are the illegal immigrants, we're killing them or something. I don't remember exactly what it was, but I know that they were like showing this to young kids. And like, of course, the young kids, they see everyone like being happy about it. And they're like, yay, yippee, get like stuff like that. And it kind of just is like, it like disgusts me that it's like, these are the thoughts you're putting in the heads of young children. Like, this is what you want to teach people.
Taking out, blowing up. Taking out, blowing up.
Yeah, that genuinely is like very horrible. Like now, going back to like actual consequences for youth when this happens, since we were also talking about how, youth being racially discriminated when they don't know it's racism, it makes them grow up with feelings of shame and low self-worth. But also another consequence for youth that aren't being racially discriminated is that they're just being taught this mindset when they grow up that is a very harmful and bad mindset to
Mm-hmm.
have. And also that this just doesn't happen to just like white students. And in my own experience as a minority, as an Asian American, I have seen in the Asian American community that there's a lot of anti-blackness. And this, I know this hasn't been commonly talked about, but for some reason there are minority groups who the parents are telling them that type of minority is bad and this person is bad. So this isn't just happening to white students, but this can happen to minorities. And then like when they grow up, this is just a harmful mindset for anyone, regardless of race.
Yeah, of course. And like we talked about, it kind of just perpetuates these boundaries and it perpetuates these negative thoughts because I mean racial discrimination is always like a cycle. It's always it's originally starts out by people in authority instilling it into young people, and then if you grow up internalizing that, either if you're from any way, you're going to perpetuate that because that's all you've known, that's what you've been taught is right. And I mean there's a lot of times where people will see through that, like if you're smart and you grow up and you think, even though my family was racially discriminatory, thought bad about this group or whatever, a lot of times, people can see through that and realize to be like, hey, that's not okay. I still realize that that's wrong. But unfortunately, when you instill this idea into people as they grow up, it can last for a while and it can have these consequences of now we have people in positions of authority continuing to spread this, and it's like a virus. I mean, it really is. So that's kind of the thing with this, is it kind of needs to be cut off from the source of just like, don't it's I mean it's a simple thing of just don't teach people to hate each other. Like, no reason to do that. If you never teach children to hate each other, you're never going to have a child going on a playground and being like, "Oh yeah, I don't want to play with you because you're a different color than me." Like they don't think about that. Like I never thought about that. Like as a non-minority, I never once thought in elementary school seeing anyone who was a minority and being like, "Oh yeah, I don't want to play with you because you're different than me." Like that's just not a thing that people think about if they're not taught to think that. And it really goes into, you got to cut this off from the source.
Yeah, and it's just bad because I was actually on the playground and told that I couldn't go on specific things because I was Asian. Someone said to me, "You can't be on the seesaw if you're Asian."
Wow.
Um, wow, like who taught you this, And it's
Mm-hmm.
just like so harmful to see these people grow up like this. And like you said, that it's still going to happen and it's still happening, as you can see, like um as these people in authority and like teachers and administration and principals in schools, like it's still happening, and there needs to be a way to just like cut this off.
Yeah, of course. That's kind of the message that I want to leave off on, is just, we have to, the way to fight this is just to not teach children to hate and everything. But, it's been almost an hour and everything. So I think we can go ahead and wrap up. Is there any like last thoughts or like last like messages you want to leave off on for this?
um no, but basically I think that it's very like a takeaway is that like just genuinely just needs to stop, and that there needs to be a break in this cycle that's happening.
Yeah, of course. That's a good message to leave off on. Well, thank you so much for your time and, talking about this and your stories and everything. And we'll see everyone in the next episode. Bye bye.
Thank you.